Marlon Brando. The ultimate Hollywood rebel and the symbol of a raw, masculine power that completely changed acting. To the world, he was a legendary ladies' man, with a laundry list of famous affairs. 3 marriages, and at least 11 children. He was Stanley Kowalski, Terry Malloy, Vito Corleone, icons of manhood, burned into the very soul of cinema. His on-screen magnetism was matched only by his off-screen reputation as a relentless womanizer. He was the man other men wanted to be, and the man women wanted to be with. In a 1976 interview, decades before it was remotely acceptable, Marlon Brando dropped a bombshell that shattered every expectation of a Hollywood leading man. He casually tore down the wall of his public persona with a single, stunning admission. He told a journalist, "Like a large number of men, I, too, have had homosexual experiences, and I am not ashamed. I have never paid much attention to what people think about me." That one sentence cracked open a door that had been sealed shut by the studios, the press, and the crushing hypocrisy of Hollywood's golden age. It was a hint of a hidden life, lived in the shadows for decades. The full story behind Brando's admission remained a mystery, the subject of whispers and rumors. He said he had experiences, but with whom? He wasn't ashamed, but who were the men who shared his life and his secrets? Brando himself never publicly named names. So in this video, we're piecing together the puzzle. We'll uncover the credible accounts, the corroborated stories, and the lifelong bonds to reveal the men Marlon Brando was rumored to have loved. To understand the man who could be both a symbol of heterosexuality and a quiet pioneer of sexual freedom, you have to go back to the beginning, back to Omaha, Nebraska, where Marlon Brando Jr. was born into a storm of chaos. His childhood wasn't some idyllic Midwestern dream. It was a battleground of emotional neglect and loneliness that forged the complicated man he became. His father, Marlon Brando Sr., was a cold, distant, and brutally critical figure who frequently told his son he would amount to nothing. This constant negativity from the man whose approval he desperately wanted left a deep wound in Brando, a void he'd spend his life trying to fill with adoration, conflict, and love of fun from unconventional places. The rebellion that defined his career wasn't just an act. It was a survival mechanism. His mother, Dodie, was a different kind of tragedy. She was a creative, charismatic woman who introduced Brando to art and acting, but Dodie was also a severe alcoholic. Her love was a flickering light, often lost in a haze of liquor. Brando recalled the pain of finding her drunk after school, making her an unreliable source of comfort. He loved her deeply, but he was forced to be her rescuer, her confidant, and often her parent. That's toxic mix. A cruel father and a tragically unavailable mother created a personality that was both fiercely independent and achingly needy. He learned early that authority was a sham and rules were made to be broken. When he was sent to Shattuck Military Academy, his rebellious streak became the stuff of legend. He was insubordinate, a prankster, and famously got himself expelled just before graduation for riding his motorcycle through the halls. It's here, in this rigid, hyper-masculine world, that biographers claim Brando had his first homosexual experience with another cadet, not as an act of love, but as another act of defiance. When he finally escaped to New York City to study acting with Stella Adler, he was a raw bundle of talent, anger, and desire. Adler taught him to use his own pain to create authentic emotion on stage. For a young man whose inner life was a raging sea, this wasn't just an acting technique, it was salvation. It gave him permission to be vulnerable, sensitive, and angry, the things his father had tried to beat out of him. This childhood, a desperate search for love fused with a rebellion against all authority, is the key to everything that followed. His attraction to both men and women wasn't just about sex. It was about seeking connection wherever he could find it and refusing to be put in a box. The world wanted to label him the tough guy, the ladies' man, but Brando's soul was far more complex, forged in a lonely fire that made him a lifelong rebel. When Marlon Brando exploded onto the scene, he walked into a Hollywood that was a machine built on fantasy. The golden age was ruled with an iron fist by the studio system and its moral code, the Hays Code. This code didn't just control what you saw on screen, it bled into the private lives of the stars, demanding they project an image of wholesome heterosexual perfection whether it was true or not. For actors, a studio contract was a deal with the devil. In exchange for fame, they gave up control of their lives. Morality clauses meant any scandal could end a career overnight. Gossip columnists like Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons weren't just reporters, they were the industry's moral police, capable of destroying a star with a single sentence. In this world, being anything other than straight was a career-ending liability. The pressure was enormous. Stars like Rock Hudson, who was secretly gay, were forced into so-called lavender marriages, sham unions designed to provide a heterosexual cover story. An actor's private life wasn't his own. It belonged to the studio, and it had to fit the fantasy. Into this world of pristine lies walked Marlon Brando. He was different from the start. He didn't look or sound like the polished leading men of the time. He mumbled, he slouched, he wore a torn t-shirt in a streetcar named Desire. And he brought a raw, dangerous sexuality to the screen that Hollywood had never seen. His rebellion wasn't just on screen. He refused to play the game. He gave bizarre interviews, mocked the idea of stardom, and showed open contempt for the Hollywood machine. He was real in an industry built on fakes. This is what makes his later admission so incredible. While other stars were desperately hiding their truth, Brando, even in a culture of brutal repression, simply refused to be ashamed. He was playing by his own rules. His sexual fluidity was just an extension of his rebellious nature. He saw labels like gay and straight as just more arbitrary rules from a society he rejected. His relationships with men weren't something to be hidden in shame, but simply a part of his life that existed outside the narrow box of public expectation. The secrecy surrounding his male relationships wasn't necessarily born from his own shame, but from the very real danger that honesty posed in that era. For the men he was with, public exposure could have meant total ruin. Brando was a man ahead of his time, living his truth decades before the world was ready to hear it. Marlon Brando's romantic life was a sprawling, complicated map of passionate affairs and tumultuous marriages. But while the world focused on his famous female partners, a parallel story was unfolding in private. This hidden side of the icon is a story of profound bonds with men, pieced together from personal confessions and credible accounts. Of all the men in Marlon Brando's life, none held a more special or lasting place than the actor Wally Cox. Their bond was the bedrock of Brando's emotional world. To many, they were an odd couple. Brando, the brawny, brooding powerhouse, and Cox, the slight, nerdy star of the TV series Mr. Peepers. But their connection ran deeper than almost any other in Brando's life. They met as 9-year-old boys and became inseparable roommates in New York years later. Brando was fiercely protective of Cox, and Cox was one of the very few people who could handle Brando's notoriously difficult temperament. But was it more than just friendship? Brando himself gave the most telling clue. He once told a journalist, "If Wally had been a woman, I would have married him, and we would have lived happily ever after." Another account from a writer claimed Brando confessed that Wally Cox had been the love of his life. While there's no definitive proof, their relationship was sexual. The most powerful evidence of their love came after Cox's sudden death in 1973. Brando was devastated. He couldn't bear to let his friend go, and he kept Cox's ashes in his home for over 30 years, reportedly talking to them nightly. When Brando himself passed away in 2004, his final wishes were clear. His ashes were to be scattered with Wally Cox. The two were laid to rest together in Death Valley in Tahiti, a final testament to a love that transcended friendship and defied convention. It was, by all accounts, the most significant and lasting love of Marlon Brando's life. For decades, the stories of Brando's male lovers were confined to whispers. Then, in 2018, music legend Quincy Jones, a longtime friend of Brando, dropped a bombshell in an interview with Vulture. He casually reeled off a list of Brando's alleged lovers, saying, "He'd F anything, anything. He'd F a mailbox. James, Baldwin, Richard Pryor, Marvin Gaye." The claim was shocking, and coming from Quincy Jones, it was impossible to ignore. While the Marvin Gaye allegation was denied by his family, the Richard Pryor story took on a life of its own when it was emphatically corroborated by Pryor's widow, Jennifer Lee Pryor. She told TMZ that Richard, who was open with friends about his bisexuality, would have no shame about the story coming out. She said Pryor had even documented his experiences with men in his private diaries. It was the 70s. Drugs were still good, especially Quaaludes, she famously said. If you did enough cocaine, you'd F a radiator and send it flowers in the morning. She framed it not as a grand love affair, but as a dalliance indicative of the era's sexual freedom. The story wasn't without controversy. Pryor's daughter and Brando's son both disputed the claim. However, with powerful corroboration from both a close friend of Brando's and the widow of Pryor, it remains one of the most credible revelations about Brando's private life. Beyond these key relationships, Brando's name has long been tangled up with two other titans of his generation, James Dean and Montgomery Clift. Together, the three formed a holy trinity of method acting, and according to numerous biographies, Brando may have been lovers with both. James Dean, the iconic * rebel, without a cause * was reportedly obsessed with Brando. Biographies allege they had a volatile, on-again, off-again sexual relationship, one that tormented Dean, who craved an emotional connection that the detached Brando wouldn't provide. Montgomery Clift, another brilliant and deeply troubled actor, also shared a complex bond with Brando. Biographies allege that they too had a sexual relationship. Like Dean, Clift struggled with his sexuality and substance abuse, and their shared history as pioneers of the method has forever linked them. While the stories are persistent in Hollywood lore, they remain allegations from secondary sources, not direct confirmations. Brando's incredible appetite for life has led to a long list of other alleged male partners, featuring some of the biggest names of the 20th century. Hollywood biographies are filled with sensational claims, floating names like Burt Lancaster, Laurence Olivier, and even Paul Newman as one-time partners. But this is where the stories get wild, and where we have to be careful. These claims largely come from posthumous biographies, often relying on second-hand accounts. Unlike the deep bond with Wally Cox, or the corroborated story about Richard Pryor, these other names remain in the realm of speculation. They're part of the Brando legend, but not necessarily the factual record. When you're talking about someone as legendary as Marlon Brando, the line between history and myth gets blurry. So, let's break down what we actually know versus what's just rumor. At the very top, we have Marlon Brando himself. His 1976 interview is the starting point. In his own words, "I, too, have had homosexual experiences, and I am not ashamed." This is not a rumor, it's a direct public statement. It is irrefutable proof. His profound lifelong devotion to Wally Cox is also fact, supported by his own words about wanting to marry him and his final wish to have their ashes scattered together. This confirms a deep, central love with another man, regardless of how you label it. The next tier of evidence is claims from credible, named sources close to the people involved. The Richard Pryor story falls right into this category. The claim came from Quincy Jones, a longtime friend, and was powerfully corroborated by Pryor's widow, Jennifer Lee Pryor, who cited her late husband's diaries. While disputed by other family members, the combined testimony from both camps gives it a high degree of credibility. Below that, you have the world of biographies and second-hand stories. This is where the names James Dean, Montgomery Clift, and Laurence Olivier live. These stories are compelling and have been repeated so often, they feel true. But they come from authors citing sources who are often anonymous or reporting on things from decades ago. This doesn't mean they're false in an era where exposure meant ruin. Proof is hard to come by, but it does mean we should treat them with a healthy dose of caution. They're part of the legend, but they aren't established fact. By sorting through the claims, a clearer picture emerges. Brando was a man who publicly owned his sexual fluidity. He shared a bond of profound love with Wally Cox and had a credibly alleged encounter with Richard Pryor. Beyond that, he's surrounded by a fog of rumors that speak to a life lived fully and unapologetically, far outside the lines. Marlon Brando's legacy is monumental. He's the actor who broke the mold, tearing down the phony walls of performance and replacing them with a raw, emotional truth. He didn't just change how actors acted, he changed how we all saw masculinity on screen. But to remember Brando only for his work, or as the brooding ladies' man, is to miss half the picture. To get the full scope of his rebellion, you have to look at the life he lived off-screen, a life of fierce, radical authenticity. In an era of suffocating conformity, Brando was a trailblazer, not by marching in parades, but through the simple act of being himself, without apology. His 1976 declaration was an act of casual bravery that's hard to fully appreciate today. A time when his peers were living in fear of exposure, he simply refused to participate in the lie. His love for Wally Cox challenges our understanding of Hollywood history. The story of him keeping his friend's ashes for 30 years is a love story as powerful as any he ever acted out on film, revealing a man of immense sensitivity beneath the tough guy armor. The confirmation of his dalliance with Richard Pryor further cements him as someone who lived by his own rules. He was a man of voracious appetites for food, for women, for men, for justice, for life itself. In the end, Marlon Brando's story isn't just about a list of names. It's about a singular figure who insisted on living a complete and authentic life in a world that demanded everyone be simple and fake. He challenged the hypocrisies of Hollywood, the rigid definitions of masculinity, and the suffocating silence around sexuality. He was a rebel in every sense, but his greatest rebellion may have been against the dehumanizing idea that any person can be defined by a single story. Marlon Brando's life was a symphony of contradictions, and by embracing all of them, he left a legacy not just of great art, but of radical, unapologetic truth. If you were fascinated by this look into Hollywood's hidden history, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications for more deep dives into the secrets of the Golden Age, and let us know in the comments, which classic Hollywood star's secrets should we uncover next? Thanks for watching.